She was the poster child for modern startup success, dazzling investors, landing partnerships with household brands, and being whispered about in venture circles as the next billion-dollar unicorn. But for hundreds who put money and faith into that dream, the moment of reckoning came like a knockout punch. By one estimate, more than $300 million were allegedly taken from investors, money that evaporated into a web of false audits, fake bank records, and promises that never had a foundation. When your investment is built on lies, who pays the price? CaaStle, a company that marketed itself as clothing as a service, grew quickly into the kind of multi-headed promise modern venture capital eats for breakfast: recurring revenue, a direct-to-consumer model, and apparently insatiable market. The story reads like a dream: subscription revenue, partnerships with big names, and a valuation, $1.4 billion at the peak, that made headlines. But prosecutors say that dream was a lie. The founder, Christine Hunsaker, was indicted on a 6-count criminal complaint that alleges wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, false statements to a financial institution, and aggravated identity theft. The government says the scheme spanned years and duped investors out of more than $300 million. Prosecutors point to a dizzying gap between the numbers the company presented and what independent audits later showed. In 2023, they say CaaStle reported hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, when the reality was tens of millions less. It's not just math. This is public trust and private savings. Misleading projections can turbocharge a company's valuation, and valuations turn into investments, salaries, loans, livelihoods. When the numbers are lies, people lose more than money. Like many startups that grabbed headlines in the last decade, CaaStle's story began with an elegant idea and a charismatic founder. The pitch was crisp: clothes as a subscription service delivered with convenience and a promise of sustainability. The company promised predictable revenue streams in a market that covets surprise-proof businesses. In the early rounds, investors were intrigued. The company reported rapid growth. Big names were mentioned in boardrooms and investment memos. By late 2023, the narrative, not the audited balance sheet, painted CaaStle as a jewel for the next IPO wave. The rise, measured in press clippings and term sheets, was the magnet that drew money from institutional investors, family offices, and wealthy individuals. Those investments, in turn, were used to fuel the growth story the company sold. Documents turned out to be the fingerprints. The indictment alleges falsified bank statements, bogus audits, and invented revenue channels. Figures were massaged, transactions were mischaracterized, and, prosecutors allege, signatures were forged to create a veneer of legitimacy. One allegation that stands out: Hunsaker reported that CaaStle made $439.9 million in revenue in 2023, with tens of millions in profits. In reality, auditors found roughly $15.7 million in revenue for the same period, a gulf wide enough to question everything about the company's valuation. For investors, the fantasy was very expensive. For rank-and-file employees, the fantasy meant missed paychecks and uncertainty. And for customers, the promise of an enduring service quietly collapsed. According to prosecutors, the scheme didn't stop with a single round. Even as scrutiny mounted, the story goes, Hunsaker allegedly continued to feed investors new forecasts and fresh financial statements, some purportedly forged, to secure additional funding. The indictment also alleges personal enrichment through self-dealing transactions. Prosecutors say Hunsaker sold portions of her own shares to investors who were allegedly not aware of the company's true plight. New ventures, including a company called P180, also figure into the narrative as prosecutors say funds were shuffled. Even after the board removed her from leadership and devices were seized, investigators say the marketing of new ventures and solicitations continued, a ghost of the old promise, reaching for fresh capital. Numbers are one thing, but the same dollar signs represent life choices: retirement plans, children's tuition, charities, and business payrolls. Victims in the CaaStle case came from many walks of life: institutional investors who want returns for pensions, and individuals who believed the brand's narrative. And then there's the betrayal of an industry in search of heroes. Silicon Valley craves vision, and when visionaries fall, the ripple impacts confidence across an entire ecosystem. Twist. The defense hasn't sat quietly. Hunsaker's lawyers pushed back, saying the indictment tells only part of the story, emphasizing cooperation during the investigation and arguing that the public record misrepresents complex business decisions. The truth in the courtroom may look very different than it does on a press release. The question that slices through this case is not only what happened, but how a convincing narrative, polished decks, confident presentations, and public charisma could conceal such a dramatic gap between image and reality. On July 18, 2025, the long-simmering story boiled over into formal charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office laid out 6 counts in the indictment: wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, making false statements to a financial institution, and aggravated identity theft, charges that carry decades behind bars if convictions stand. She pleaded not guilty and was released on $1 million bail. Her legal team argued cooperation with authorities and contested the framing of the indictment. For many watching, however, the headlines were unmistakable. A founder who built a glowing public image was now a defendant in one of the largest investor fraud cases in recent memory. The indictment's release triggered immediate fallout. CaaStle's liquidation and Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing on June 20th. Investors were left with what the law calls now worthless shares. That phrase is clinical, but its real meaning lands hard. Funds gone, plans derailed. The criminal case is one track of accountability. The civil track runs in parallel. The Securities and Exchange Commission has also filed a civil complaint alleging misrepresentations to investors. Civil penalties and injunctions could lead to additional recoveries or restrictions, but they rarely fully compensate the human damage. Some investors will pursue clawbacks or claims in bankruptcy court. Others will file separate litigation seeking restitution. But the best long-term outcomes depend on rethinking incentives, better due diligence, stricter independent audits, and transparent governance. If anything must be salvaged from this mess, it is a renewed respect for independent confirmation over storytelling. Vision is vital to innovation, but when vision is untethered to verifiable facts, people, not just balance sheets, suffer. In courtroom corridors and conference rooms, life proceeds with small, heavy adjustments. A retired teacher who invested a portion of her pension, a small vendor who supplied garments and never saw invoices cleared, a junior engineer whose stock options are suddenly worthless. The human ledger of loss is long and varied. Still, there are moral also-rans in every scandal. The venture firm that failed to verify a key claim, the accounting arm that signed off on a suspect audit, the journalist who prioritized hype over scrutiny. All are part of a story that extends past one founder. If you want part 2, where we trace funds, interview victims, and unpack the legal filings in detail, subscribe, hit the bell, and share this episode.